Marcus Holloway understood one fundamental truth about his line of work: hesitation meant defeat. In a world where every decision could be a matter of life or death, even the smallest mistake could push someone straight into the headlines. Marcus, however, was used to this high-stakes environment, was the director of the FBI's Criminal Investigations Division, and had long learned how to play this dangerous game. But tonight, the rules had changed. This wasn't about investigating a criminal or following leads, it was about survival. The night air in Washington, D.C. was thick, heavy with the oppressive humidity of a late summer evening. The usual buzz of the city had softened, traffic slowing to a crawl as the streets emptied, and the vibrant city noises faded into an eerie stillness. But for Marcus, the night was far from winding down. He had just left a high-stakes meeting with a federal informant, an exchange where one misstep, one misplaced word, could set off a chain of catastrophic events that would affect some very powerful people. This wasn't information that was meant to be public, and Marcus knew the risks of a leak all too well. He couldn't afford to trust anyone. His own security detail wasn't even aware of the meeting. Marcus couldn't help but think about the consequences. A single slip-up could be fatal. If anyone found out what he knew, his life could end up in the Potomac River with no one the wiser. It was a chilling thought, but it was one he had learned to live with. As he entered the underground parking garage of a high-end steakhouse, a place known for its exclusive clientelizators who dined on overpriced steaks while making deals that would never see the light of day, Marcus felt the weight of the night's events pressing down on him. His black Cadillac Escalade Saturday in the far corner of the garage, its tinted windows gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. He had just reached for his keys when the stillness of the garage was shattered by the sudden blare of sirens. The unmistakable sound of tires screeching followed, and Marcus knew something was wrong. A series of heavy footsteps echoed through the garage, the sound growing louder with every passing second. He turned slowly, prepared for whatever was coming his way. Two officers approached. One was already gripping his holster with the kind of desperation Marcus had seen in rookies, the kind of cop who felt more comfortable with a weapon than a badge. The other officers, Bradley Whitaker, stood tall with a muscular frame and a buzz cut that made it clear he still thought high school football was the pinnacle of his life. His face was twisted in a self-satisfied smirk, as though he'd just caught the world's most dangerous criminal. Marcus was used to this kind of cop, the ones who wore their arrogance like armor, the ones who used their badge as a weapon to belittle anyone they deemed beneath them. And as Whitaker ordered Marcus to place his hands on the hood of the car, Marcus didn't flinch. He wasn't intimidated. "Something wrong, officers?" Marcus asked, his voice smooth but sharp. Whitaker's grin only widened. "This car came up as stolen. Looks like you're in for a rough night." The implication was clear. Whitaker wasn't just investigating a stolen car. He was investigating Marcus. And Marcus knew I was a black man in a high-end neighborhood, and in Whitaker's eyes, that made him guilty before he even had a chance to speak. Marcus glanced down at his attire: a tailored suit, a Rolex on his wrist, and Italian leather shoes completely out of place in a stolen car scenario. He couldn't help but let out a quiet sigh. "Why don't you check the registration?" he suggested calmly. But it was clear Whitaker wasn't interested in paperwork. He wanted a confrontation. The officer's grip tightened on his gun, and his voice came out harsh and commanding. I set hands on the hood. The air in the garage seemed to grow thick with tension. Marcus stayed still, but his mind was working. This wasn't about the car. It wasn't about stolen property. Whitaker wasn't looking for an explanation, wanted control. He wanted to see Marcus flinch, to force him into a situation where he could use his badge as a weapon. But Marcus wasn't about to give him that satisfaction. Marcus knew exactly what was happening. Whitaker was looking for a reason to escalate, to push him into a confrontation. The officer's hand was tightening on his gun, his knuckles white with the desire to take control of the situation. Marcus could feel the power shifting in the air. The moment was delicate. A wrong move and the situation could spiral into violence. But Marcus wasn't afraid. He had been in worse situations before, and he knew how to handle himself. "You just made a mistake," Marcus said, his voice smooth as glass, but laced with an edge that cut through the tense silence. The words were a warning, not a threat. Whitaker's smirk remained in place, but Marcus could see the subtle twitch in the officer's eye. He wasn't in control anymore. The tension in the air was palpable. The harsh glow of the fluorescent lights above seemed to exaggerate every shadow, making the garage feel smaller, more claustrophobic. Whitaker's grip on the gun tightened further. His eyes locked on Marcus like he was waiting for the smallest twitch. He wanted to escalate. Marcus knew that, and Whitaker was hoping for just one wrong move. But Marcus didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He stood still, as calm and deliberate as ever, his mind already several steps ahead. He had been in situations like this before. He had dealt with cops who thought they could push people around, who believed that the power of the badge meant they could do whatever they wanted. Whitaker wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. The moment everything changed came in the form of a single, deliberate step. Marcus moved forward just enough to make Whitaker hesitate. It was a simple trick, one Marcus had learned it over years of dealing with people who thought they had all the power. The moment Whitaker flinched, Marcus would strike. The situation had shifted completely. It was no longer about defending himself. Marcus had moved into attack mode, and he was ready. The moment Whitaker flinched, Marcus acted. In one fluid motion, he slammed both hands down against the hood of the car. The sound echoed through the garage, sharp and deliberate. It was the kind of noise that made the brain react before it could think. Whitaker hesitated for just a fraction of a second, and that was all Marcus needed. In an instant, Marcus moved. He lunged forward, his hand reaching for Whitaker's gun, twisting it out of the officer's grip in one swift motion. The weapon clattered across the concrete, sliding underneath a nearby car. Whitaker's face changed from smug satisfaction to fear. It was the first time Marcus had seen fear in the officer's eyes. But Marcus didn't stop there. He had no time to savor the victory. In one smooth, practiced motion, he struck Whitaker with a precise hit to the solar plexus. The officer's breath whooshed out of him, his body doubling over as he gasped for air. Before Marcus could even process what was happening, the second officers had reached for his radio, calling for backup. Marcus couldn't let him get the chance. In a single, brutal movement, he grabbed the officer's wrist, twisting it outward with a sickening crack. The radio flew from the officer's hand, landing across the pavement. Marcus slammed him to the ground, pinning him face first onto the concrete. The second officer struggled but couldn't break free. In that moment, Marcus stood over them. The garage fell into an eerie silence. The only sounds were the heavy breathing of the two officers and the distant hum of the city outside. Marcus could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, but he was in control. He had won. The silence didn't last long. Marcus heard footsteps approaching, heavy and deliberate. More cops. His eyes flicked toward the entrance of the garage, and sure enough, more officers flooded in. But these weren't just any cops. They were tactical, armed to the teeth and ready for a fight. The red and blue lights of the squad cars painted the entire scene in a flashing, chaotic nightmare. Face down, one of the new officers yelled, his voice booming across the garage. But Marcus didn't move. His hands were raised, slow and controlled. He wasn't going to lie down for anyone. Not for Whitaker, not for anyone. Whitaker, on the other hand, was still standing, grinning like he had just won some twisted victory. "You're finished," he sneered, the arrogance dripping from his every word. "Hope you enjoyed that little stunt. Your career's over." Marcus didn't respond. He wasn't here for a war of words. He knew what was coming next. The sound of more footsteps calm, controlled sounded through the garage. They weren't from the officers. They were from federal agents. His agents. The feds moved like a well-oiled machine, spreading out to cut off every exit. One of them, a tall woman in a dark blazer, approached Marcus, handing him a golden badge. "Everything is under control, sir," she said, her voice crisp and professional. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of the badge in his hand. He turned to Whitaker, whose smirk had finally vanished. It was replaced by something far more unsettling for Marcus tilted his head, pulling a sealed envelope from his jacket. He tossed it at Whitaker's feet. "Go ahead, open it." Whitaker's hand shook as he bent down and tore open the envelope, his face strained of color as he read the words inside. "Charges. Federal charges for corruption, evidence tampering, false arrests, and abuse of authority." His world collapsed in an instant. Marcus stepped forward, his voice low, measured. "9 months, that's how long I've been watching you, building the case, while you dug your own grave." Whitaker frowned. Reality crashed down on him as the truth came into focus. Marcus had been setting this up all along. The federal agents moved swiftly, one of them snapping the cuffs onto Whitaker's wrists with a satisfying click. The officer struggled, but it was pointless. Marcus leaned in close, his voice a low whisper. "You thought you were the hunter, but let me tell you something, you were the prey all along." As Whitaker was dragged away, his face twisted in disbelief, Marcus watched, his heart steady and his mind clear. Justice wasn't always loud or chaotic. Sometimes it was silent, precise, and brutal, and tonight Whitaker had learned that lesson the hard way. Game over.